Hey everyone, it's Andrew Brown, and welcome to the free GenAI Bootcamp. I have with us here today Ken Collins, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different because we're going to be focusing on the career side of matching your skills that we're learning here to the possible roles that you can get in the AI space or GenAI space. But we're going to see that in just in a moment here. But I want to pass it over to Ken so Ken Collins can introduce himself. And so take it away, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So good friend. You and I go way back. We're both AWS heroes, and we both have really well knitted blankets. From I don't have mine on today. It's pretty warm in my house.
Hmm.
But, we got the same vibe. And so for folks that may not have met me before, so my name is Ken Collins. Currently, I'm the VP of Product at Torque, which is a talent marketplace and staff augmentation. Recently acquired by a larger company called Randstad Digital. So very big company, very global. We've got lots of opportunities for, and probably a unique take on people being able to create profiles, share more about themselves, and find the right work that's right for them. That's I think is pretty distinct, right? It's the ability to build sort of rich data about yourself, express yourself in different ways, not just past the resume, but also we're building incredibly cool technology with AI to help that from the other side of the fence, right? Like how do companies find you? Uh, and fundamentally, I've been in this funny recruiting sort of talent cloud business for about 4 or 5 months, and I think I have some pretty interesting ideas of how this can all change and be a lot better,
And
especially with AI.
and I think what's really interesting is that your background before you're a principal engineer, so you came from a very technical role, and now you're on the other side for us to tell us like, hey, this is actually how it happens because a lot of us folks on this side of it are saying like, how do I align my skills? What do companies actually want? And it's
Mhm.
hard if you just work for a single company because you know what that company wants. But now you're on the recruiting side, so I feel that you have this wealth of knowledge that you're going to share with us. And I want boot campers to really hone in on this information.
Yeah, it's an odd one, Andrew. I mean, I go all the way back to where before, like I was a graphic artist for a long time, and I was an account executive at a new media or an ad agency, and then I was a marketing director for an e-commerce company. So I kind of bring a lot of weird skills, but now that I've sort of finished up a really good stint, about 15 years or so in just software development, uh, I'm excited to get back to the other side and the leadership side and trying to uh, bring all this together with a fresh perspective. And for context, one of the things I'll do today for folks is we'll walk through some of the things that I see and apply and what I'm looking for in AI engineers. And I think that's potentially very different from the marketplace. So I've just finished some hiring up and hiring a new group in my team to sort of shoot the Torque business a little bit further past than where we are today, and even that's ahead. But AI changes so fast, and uh, there's so much happening in the industry that I basically wanted a new team to sort of build out prototypes to get about like 6 months ahead of where we could potentially be, and then sort of engineer the right products along the way to get us there. And finding talent is pretty hard. And I think there's a lot that we can do with technology change that. But I thought what would be really cool today is to share a lot of the things that I've been looking for and what I've seen in the talent marketplace, and what I think is a unique opportunity for your group to attach onto some skills that I see as important. That's going to make them, I think everybody feels like they want 10 years of experience in something. But I think one of the cool things about AI is that it's really disrupting a lot of things. And you have this moment now more than ever to sort of tack towards these skills that I think are incredibly important, and then ride that wave with it and get jobs that maybe you thought that you really couldn't get before. And I think the opportunity is huge. And if you can kind of get those skills and promote them in the right way, then you can really align yourselves with what companies are looking for.
What's interesting is I always think of the stories from back in the early '90s or '80s of developers or people in the game industry, and listening to how they came up with their technical solutions at a time when things did not exist.
Mm.
And a lot of times they're coming up with imperfect solutions, but the solutions they came up with nobody else was doing. And so it's like they came up with an imperfect one, and then somebody else copied that imperfect one, and then it finally came into the final iteration of what it had to be, but there was nothing stopping them from saying, "Oh, this is not the right way. We're just going to do it because we don't know any better, but it is right until someone says that it's wrong." And even when I look at like my background in the Rails, like Ruby on Rails side of it, and I think Ken, you have some experience with Ruby on Rails as well, right? And
Yes.
so, yes, I'm underplaying it there. Ken really knows Ruby on Rails, and so, I got in that space in 2005, and at that time, when I wanted to learn how to build apps in this new way of building frameworks, and there were open source projects out there like Mephisto, which was like a blogging platform built on the Rails platform. And um, I the only way I could figure out how to build a production app, because that was the only one that was open source on SourceForge. I just had to scour through it, and it was a mess, but I didn't know it was a mess. And I just took what I could to get it to work. And then in retrospect, you go, oh, it's so obvious what was the right path. And so I just want to kind of emphasis on the opportunity that there is right now. And
So much.
in this boot camp, we are changing technology on the fly, because like DeepSeek came out and everyone's like, DeepSeek, is it important? I'm like, I don't know, but we're going to give it a go. Do you know what I mean? Or it's just every 2 seconds, something's changing, right? And I mean, there's going to be stuff that's going to be foundational or conceptual information that's going to carry on with us. But then
Mhm.
there's just stuff that we're going to be throwing away constantly, and we're going to be jumping to the one from one ship to another. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what you're bringing to the table here. And I think you got like a very interactive presentation for us. And so we'll just let you pull up your screen there and take a look.
Yeah, let's go through it. So, rather unusual. I am also known for creating very slim slides that sort of tell a narrative. But I've been having so much fun lately with Excalidraw, uh, because I recently found out you can use the Excalidraw extension within VS Code. So you can basically check in. You can just with local files. So you can go to excalidraw.com. There's a Chrome extension where you can save certain files in browser local stack memory, and just have some really nice. It's just a really great tool. But the fact that you can download these files inside and put them into a Git repo and version control them, and you basically get the whole Excalidraw interface within VS Code with the extension. I'm just been
Oh,
hooked on this
well,
lately.
well,
Yeah.
well, Ken, you know what? This would have been really good for me in my pre-week, because
Mhm.
I created a bunch of diagrams and lucid charts,
Mhm.
and you have to pay. You have to pay if you want
Yeah.
versioning, right?
Right, right, and you
Um,
just get it for free.
but listen to my pain here. So for boot campers, they already know this, but like we had to share a link so they could see it. And the other Andrew, when he shared the link, he shared the edit link. And so all of my diagrams were blasted away in like chaos and mess. And then there was new diagrams that I had never made, that I'd never seen before. And so I have to remake them all. And I was just like, what solution could I have that would allow me to, like, free or paid or whatever, that I could download it? And you just showed me something. So I'm like, maybe this is what I'm using tomorrow to remake all those diagrams. If you're saying I can download this in a repo, then
Yes.
I can show it in VS Code, then that's what I'm gonna do.
I've given 1 hour long talks before on amazing technology, and the first question after I stopped talking would be, "What theme are you using in your editor?" Like, so we just get that out of the way first, right?
Mm, but,
And I am in Cursor here because I'm incredibly cool, and everybody should use Cursor, I think. Uh, okay, so let's start at the top. So this is the role that I hired for. It's called Applied AI Engineer. And Andrew, you and I had talked about this. Like, what's a good job title, right? I think a lot of folks are hiring for AI engineer. Um, I put applied in front of it because so if you go to, I have a blog, it's called unremarkable.ai. And what I try to teach folks is, or at least share my story, is that I don't have a machine learning background. I don't have data science. I don't have, I'm not even good with Excel sheets, right? Just, uh, I
but
was,
but but Google Sheets you're good with, right? Well, well, Google Sheets is way easier to use.
yeah.
Excel is just like layers of legacy Windows stuff that you have to navigate. But sorry, yep.
I wouldn't even say I'm good with Google Sheets, right? Like
Mm.
I am I'm the type of engineer that I'm not building functions or other things like that, right? I'm just trying to creatively think about problems. So the thing that I think was hard, you and I talked about this. Do we call it a AI practitioner? And I like applied, right? So I am a practitioner, and I encourage everybody else to lean to that side. But one of the things that I think is interesting with the market today, if you go and look at various what companies are hiring for an AI engineer, they're advertising. If you look at the skills, they're talking about making AI. And what I want to talk about is the opportunity on the use AI. And I don't think there's enough emphasis there on hiring managers understanding the skills that you need for that, and the opportunity there to do amazing work inside of a lot of different companies when you're just applying AI an applied practitioner perspective.
And
So,
something we should make
mhm,
clear is that the boot camp is focused on the use AI component, whereas the make AI, that's like our guest instructor Rolla, who is a PhD in neuroscience and
mhm.
can build models from scratch. That's someone that they would hire, and those are the companies that raise, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of million. I don't know how much money, but a lot of money. That are very specialized in the task. But just to clarify that, there, sorry.
Yes, and if you make AI and that's what you do, I think you're great, and we need you. Uh, I think there's opportunity on the right-hand side. That's where I operate on the right-hand side, and I think there's just way more opportunity over there. But we do need people to make this sort of stuff, and there are points to where you get in the use AI where you need to maybe do sort of more to the make, right? Maybe you're taking small language models. But it's just sort of like walking through that, right? Like this is typically what you see when you're going out there and applying for jobs, and you got these hiring managers, and they're making these job opportunities that are very much leaning into the make AI category, right? And you're
Mhm.
going to see things like Python, you're going to see things like TensorFlow or PyTorch. Uh, they're going to think that's important because you're going to want to do some fine tuning. You might even see some. We need you to have experience with the CUDA architecture or familiarity with data pipelines. So the idea here is that this kinda goes back to 2023. This is a mismatch, I think, in skills because a lot of times when you get into these jobs, and I've been told this as well, you end up they're like, "Hey, rug pull, like, you just need to use AI," right? So
Ken, I don't know if this is a little joke you have there on the bottom, but is YOLO an actual technology?
okay, so, YOLO is, I saw this come up in a couple of my interviews. It is um, I believe you could call it a segmentation model, and it's old. It's not built on the transformers. It's just basically good old-fashioned, uh, math. I don't
Okay.
know what to call it, but, I would look at they would talk about their experience with YOLO, and I would go, "Well, w why didn't you use Meta's new Segment Anything model V2, which apparently is just really amazing, and it's based on transformers, and it's free." And they're like, "I've never heard of it." Right? So, like, you have to
Well,
stay up and it
I think what happens is, like, when you learn something and it works, you don't necessarily pull up
the
a new
devil you
thing.
right. And
Yeah.
YOLO's like 10 years old, and, you know, I would think maybe 3 years ago it was incredibly important, but it's not now, right? And I don't think hiring managers know that as well, right? They're gonna talk about convolutional neural networks and natural language processing, and, but the idea is that they really don't know what they're hiring for, and when they say an AI engineer, they're really talking to they list out the skills about making AI, right? So when they say data pipelines, for them, that's important because when you're making AI, you need to have a lot of experience either moving data from your data lake or feeding these things into ways that I probably don't even have the right vernacular to describe. Uh, but these things are just not important, and oftentimes you will end up finding that uh, they're basically just going to kind of do a rug pull on you, and they're going to go, okay, well, yeah, you're going to really kind of sit here and you need to do this stuff, right? Like we just need you not to fine tune a model, but we just need you to use an inference platform like OpenAI or Amazon Bedrock.
So,
Uh,
oh, sorry. So, are you saying that job postings are saying make AI, but they actually want to work AI? And
yes,
they're oh, okay. So then you're kind of. But does that mean that you should Well, maybe we'll get into this later. But does that mean we should have superficial knowledge in some of the make AI stuff to check those boxes, but actually have the practical skills?
well, I will tell you, some candidates, uh, early on in my interview, and when I would sit down with them for 15 minutes, I would describe that, hey, this role is about use AI versus make AI. And they would flat out admit that they just keyword stuffed just to get just to get past the hiring manager or something like that. So I think what I would recommend is that I'm going to share with you that there is a disconnect between job opportunities and what I would look for as a real hiring applied AI. That means there's a potential risk there, right? Because if you're in order to get past probably people that don't even understand that, that's going to be challenging. So I don't have a solution for that.
So, my solution, and it's just incidental, but the way we are teaching people is like on the Make AI, we do teach a bit of each of those. So,
Mhm.
like, we're not going deep. I'm just saying, like, yeah, maybe Rolla will show us how to build a very basic neural net, like a CNN, literally CNN using PyTorch. We're not going
Right.
to be experts in it, but we have exposure to it, and we can speak a little bit to it,
That's amazing.
or things like that. But really, I don't want people to be trying to build stuff, but just at least understand what's underneath. And then we have a heavy focus there. So I feel that, if somebody saw this stuff, they could say, yes, I have touched these things. No, I am not Rolla, the neuroscientist, AI engineer, like that can make. But maybe that might help them. I don't know.
Right.
Hmm.
I do find like when I was interviewing folks, they would come from this Python background, they would know all this stuff, and then I would ask them questions such as, "Hey, let's say that we have a system that's based on GPT-4o,
Hmm.
and let's assume that we have a good framework such as either LangChain or the AI Versal SDK, where it's and then I wouldn't give the answer, but I would say we have to cut costs and increase latency. And the first answer they would give is, well, let's just go start fine tuning because to them, Python and all these skills over here were the hammer and every problem I had was the nail. And the
Hmm.
answer is no, you could just change the model out from GPT-4o to something like Claude Haiku or Gemini Flash 2.0 and get like 3 times performance and probably 10 times cost savings. And you don't have to do any of that stuff. It's a one line code change, right? So depending upon your prompt engineer.
So
But like everybody contextualizes, right? If you bring this Python baggage, if you bring all this other stuff to just you applied AI engineering, there's an opportunity. Yeah, you kind of it's good to have like that basic ground set of like what these things are. But from a hiring perspective, when the rubber meets the road, a lot of times these people, I'm not saying I'm discouraging and hiring from Python people, but when you ask them questions, they just bring that Python and that experience. Oh, fine tuning, that's the way we're going to solve this. I'm like, well, what if I gave you 3 days? Hmm, maybe I have to fine tune faster or something.
well,
But
and then what if we hire somebody else and we have to pass that on? Like there's so many things that could be difficult. It's like when we wanted to put up the marketing website for this boot camp,
mhm,
I didn't have that much experience with Vercel at the time, but I do now. And I heard that it was really easy to use, and I used it and it deployed in an instant. I'm like, oh great, it solved my business use case in seconds. And to me, that's more important than,
right,
I mean, there is a cost factor. At some point, you do want to know your technical path, and it's nice to have these things as a possible option if you need to go that route. But it's just with exams. There's the horse, the zebra, and the elephants. When we talk about the layup, if the answer is a zebra, which is an exotic answer, a complex answer, which would be going to the Make AI side, whereas the horse option would have just been like swap out the model, go for the horse,
yep,
right?
yep.
Hmm.
So let's so there is a disconnect there, and I will say that I think this will course correct at some time. People will start trying to figure out, and at least within the platform that I'm building, we're gonna try to make this really easy for people to either find this mismatch. They kind of call this when in hiring, you're always looking for the purple squirrel, right? And the purple squirrel is the highly specialized person that has all the ticks every box that you want, not just the soft skills, the hard skills, the culture fit, everything like that. So I think technology is going to make this problem go away, and that hiring managers that don't know the skills that they need to actually seat are going to be a temporary thing. But this is this is a problem in the marketplace today.
So basically we need the app that lets them to swipe left or swipe right on their.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of. I never used it, but I'm just saying like just going through profiles and doing that on the hiring side would be very funny to me as a visual.
So there are those apps. So
For
maybe
for
what I
hiring
can.
for hiring.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Even
Oh, okay.
for blue collar jobs, they're very popular.
Oh, okay.
I think Home Depot came out with one too. So what I thought we could do, Andrew, is I could kind of maybe spin through a little bit, right? So this is kind of vague, right? There's these skills like prompt engineering, like how to use inference platforms, how to run evaluations, which are essentially unit tests for engineers in a different methodology. Cloud development skills, model capabilities and selection, right? That's the horse, right? Just being able to understand the models out there, the trade-offs between them, such as like, do all models have structured outputs, tool calling capabilities, stuff like that. Um, Again, the make AI people will talk about Llama, but then when you ask them hard questions about, well, how are you going to get Llama to do structured outputs, right, and stuff like that? Well, we'll host it on SageMaker. Well, Are you going to scale that? Right? It ends up being hard problems. But
The only place where we diverge, like from you and I, is that I have an additional thing that I look at, which is, do they understand how to run models? Like, let's say you want to deploy it into the cloud,
yeah,
where it's cloud native, or not even necessarily Kubernetes, but let's just say you want to have full technical flexibility down the road. If you had to go that route, do you understand the hardware requirements to run these models? And so I kind of draw that parallel by, how do you do local LLMs with your own hardware, so you can kind of understand that. But in practicality, I almost always start with serverless cloud stuff, because it's so easy to get going with. So it's not necessarily what I would say in the early on, but just more like a possible technical path that I would throw in there. Sorry.
I love that too. Yeah, because
Mhm.
eventually I think small models and deploying those are going to, the platform's going to get easier to do that, even in serverless models where they scale to zero.
Well, this is my speculative thing, is just to leave that as an open technical path in case it happens. Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that's really important for me when hiring for applied AI is compound AI. This is, I believe, a rebranding of just multi-agent systems, and to me, it's incredibly important, right? So, like I talked a little bit about in this section here, right? How do you have what are the model capabilities and their selection, right? And that's important because never is one particular agentic use case going to very rarely be with one model, right? Like maybe you're doing some summarization, very common stuff. You can do that with one model. But oftentimes, when you're trying to break out complex business problems, especially ones that duplicate what humans are doing, you're going to need to create an agentic system that has different components for it.
Hmm.
So again, I think this is a rebranding of multi-agent systems or a mixture of experts. We've heard it all before, but I think Compound AI says it a lot lately. And what I've done here is I've talked a little bit about the history of that. So if you this is my blog on
Oh, oh,
remarkable.ai.
sorry, but just one step back there.
Yeah.
Compound AI is a coin term to mean like specialized solutions within your AI workflow.
Mhm. Yeah, so
Okay.
each one of these boxes here would represent, and I'll show you a diagram example of that, would be a separate model, but cohesively, this thing would be basically an AI component or an agent, right? So the
Okay.
idea would be that you would swap out models. I'll talk about like this purple bar at the bottom here that for me represents shared memory. Uh, but if you kind of want to look at the history of what uh, multi-agent systems look like, I wrote a little. Basically, it's kinda like AutoGen or Crew AI, it's called experts.js, and what it essentially did was is it stitched together, OpenAI assistants, which is different from their chat completions API, and basically, the assistants API looks a little bit different, right? You have to create an instantiate assistant, you have to give that assistant a thread to talk through, and then, of course, as with all OpenAI models, they have really good tool calling capabilities. So the idea here was is that let's say you were building a chatbot. Don't recommend that chatbots are the ultimate thing to keep building. What's more remarkable are the things underneath them that make them work, and those are the skills that you really need to tack to, not just saying chatbot. But in this case here, imagine a company assistant chatbot. Uh, the idea is that in order for this assistant here, the products tool, for it to be the best merchandising assistant it needs to be, it doesn't need to have context of maybe another assistant that would stack underneath as like a sales assistant or an order refund assistant or something like that. So the idea is that you through specialization you end up with basically um different agents, right? So multi-agent systems typically were thought about like how well do you stitch these larger assistants or co-pilots together in meaningful ways. This is pretty hard, right? Like in this framework at experts.js helps you do that. And there's some neat things with it, right? Like it helps do thread management, which sort of manages conversation state. It solves some problems, but it creates others where you have to flow information from one way to the other. You kind of get like a grapevine effect, and it's kind of hard, right? Especially from a chatbot interface. But that's where multi-agent systems were, and where we are now with compound AI. It looks a little bit more like this, right? And I think this is way more logical. And I've built systems like this before where this makes a lot more sense. So
Before you move on there,
yeah.
so just talking to multi-agent systems, if folks that took my Gen AI Essentials, if you think back to when we used Crew AI, I made a video on that on how to make agentic workflows. This other system that Ken Collins is talking about is called Experts.js. Did you make it? Because I don't. It's not a
Yes.
fork, right? It's literally you made this. So you
Yeah.
made your own agentic AI workflow with Open. Could you take a moment? Do you have the ability to pull up your the actual repo so people can just visually see it for 2 seconds?
Yeah, definitely. So let's do
Yeah.
this, GitHub.
I'm a visual person, so if people see it once, then it'll go into their brain bookmark. And so
Yep,
Ken's just gonna get it up there. But it'd be nice to see that GitHub page. And it
yep.
says it's an OpenAI assistant. So you know what? I even though I use all these models, the one that I keep going back to is OpenAI just because it's so darn easy right now. So if you have this one and it's specific to OpenAI, I
Mhm.
probably would use it.
It
Um,
is.
and yeah, so that'd be perfect for me. I guess my other question is, when it says it's OpenAI, does that mean it's compatible with anything with the OpenAI compatibility, or is it specifically just for the OpenAI?
It's for the Assistance API. So, about a year ago, they came out
Mm,
with this Assistance API, and it's a drastic fundamental change of so if you click on this link here,
mhm.
they'll talk about the assistance. It's still in beta after almost a year. Um, every so whether you're run like if you're running LM Studio locally or if you're using the Vercel ADI AI to do different providers on the back end, most inference platforms standardize around the Open AI chat completions API,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
very standard API. This is a completely different API, and the reason it's fundamentally different, I'll describe it when I go back to my Scala draw, is that you're creating cloud resources, right? So the assistant, when you create these things, so like let's say here, um, basically you have to create a thread and you have to create an assistant, and then that thread is a managed memory layer for you, which is amazing, right? But you can get managed memory layers through
Oh,
companies
sorry.
called Zep.
I didn't mean to take over that instance, but I'm just going to quickly show people if you're in the OpenAI
Yeah,
playground, it has assistance here. And you know what? I didn't fully understand. I think I read once what it did. But I didn't fully understand it, but now it's really clicking to me. Like this is what you're talking about, which is really cool. We're learning on the fly here. I'm even learning on the fly here, so I'm really excited. But I brought your screen back up here. Sorry.
awesome. Yeah. So it is cloud resources, and because they're based on function and tool calling, you can stitch them together. So you can basically make an assistant a tool of another assistant, right? And then you can really start doing complex things and dealing with constrained memory, right? Because you know these things still have fixed content length windows and stuff like that. So, but by all means, check this out, right? This is a different way of dealing with multi-agent systems where you're stitching. It's more like a mixture of experts model. Um, uh, but yeah, very different. And then I'll go back here and show you. Let me close that window.
Mhm.
Then we'll go back into a Scala draw.
Yeah, maybe it will make an appearance in the Gen AI Essentials course.
Cool.
Because well, everything I use, I just record, right? So, it probably will end up in that course,
Okay,
but
so I
oh,
got
sorry. Yep. Oh, yeah, I'll
my
get
other
your
one
screen
back.
back up here, sorry.
There we go. Yeah. So, yeah, there's I did this, I think it's down here. Yeah, so this is the way it's different, right? Because normally you would think of, when you're dealing with chat completions, there's a logical diagram, uh, that sort of maps well to your physical, right? Like you have your own code, you're calling the API out, you're providing all the messages. But if you draw a physical diagram of what the assistance API looks like, you end up with your cloud where your code is running here. And then the API cloud, it's not just inference. You actually have, it's more like what we would look at from a cloud formation perspective, right? You are creating resources within OpenAI's cloud infrastructure, and that being
Mm,
assistant and a thread object. And then you're just invoking those through your code.
okay, and thread is just the, is just the history of the conversation?
Bingo, right? So you don't have to manage the entire conversation state. You just post new messages to the thread, and then everything is managed for you.
Okay.
Wh which I think is fundamentally amazing. Um, but I am gonna show, our audience today about another memory management system. So that's basically multi-agent AI. Here's an example of compound AI. So you have a task, you're gonna end up with some sort of output. This
Mhm,
is, uh, complex, but it need not be this complex, right? They can be 1 or 2, agents sticks together, they could be the same model. But in
mhm,
this case, I've sort of exploded this out where traditionally you might use some sort of problem analysis, right? So you can imagine if you go to, Perplexity.ai, very popular. I don't even use Google anymore. I just do everything through Perplexity, and I ask all my questions there. Whenever I ask questions, the first thing it has to do is it has to create a query plan. It has to figure out how it's going to search Google, right? So that's sort of your problem analysis stage, and you typically use reasoning models for that. Good
Hmm.
examples would be O1, O3, and now even DeepSeek R1. You typically end up with some sort of task decomposition, some processor rewards model where basically as the AI is going through its thinking and using reflection and step by step, you can either reward it or not for going around certain aligned behavior. At some point, you may need to do actions, like those actions could end up uh, performing searches on a knowledge base. But the idea here is you end up with, like in this case, that might be Llama, that might be Llama. The actions might be done with Gemini. Why Gemini? Because Gemini and OpenAI have really good contracts around tool calling. Certain inference platforms, Llama has tool calling built into the framework, but not all inference platforms implement that very well, right? And you have to spend tokens to do that sort of stuff. So,
Can I got a question about the problem analysis one? So, when we
mhm,
look at models, like anything that's not DeepSeek, um, uh, like before we had DeepSeek, where it would actually do problem analysis on like on it on itself, is that where we'd have to implement like React patterns and reflection patterns to get
yes,
similar behavior? And so the idea is now like this new type of model. I guess it baked in, but I guess you have less flexibility if you want to deviate from it. So maybe from a technical perspective, somebody, if they want to build something very custom, they might want to use a traditional, like one prior to this, and then orchestrate their own kind of reasoning before it goes on to the next task, or yes or no, or both.
I think it's all up to the task at hand, right? Like you have to measure this stuff. I think
Okay.
the thing that's most exciting to me is that when I started out the experts.js work,
Hmm.
right? One of the things that happens here is you get a lot of latency between the system, right? So this thing has to think about something, then it has to figure out that it's going to call another tool. It calls this tool.
Hmm.
This tool takes your question because it's like, all right, I might need a red hoodie,
Yep.
and I need to pull that from the product catalog. Well, maybe he uses another sub assistant to generate the SQL to even talk to the database. Once it streams and comes back with the SQL, then you have to execute that SQL, run it against the database, and then return all that information back. That takes time for each one of those arrows here. And even with GPT-4, you might end up with 8, 9 seconds to wait for.
Mm.
Um, I was making the bank, certain bets last year that when this came out, that models were going to get faster and faster. They haven't. They've gotten slower, right? So O1 slower than GPT-4o, almost 16 times as slower. Um, and then, O3 slower, R1 slower, right? And there's certain inference platforms that can make that fast. But if you were banking on just AI getting faster and faster and faster and making that better, it's not really gonna happen, right? Like, you can maybe make Llama, Gemini Flash run faster, but when you pull these reasoning models out, you should have a good reason for using a slower model, within the architecture so that your overall task and output are gonna be a little bit more aligned. And that's gonna depend on your use case. If it's a front-end use case, um, I typically shoot for 3 seconds for max attention span or flow state. If it's a back-end operational use case, it could take minutes and be fine, but it really depends on your use case.
And I don't think I've ever seen Zep. What does Zep do? Is that something to do with memory management?
Yeah, Zep is a favorite topic of mine lately. So one of the problems I've always that has kept me from using Llama, whether it be on Bedrock or or Vertex or any other sort of inference partnership or platform, is that it didn't have that thread object that managed memory. And one thing I hate doing in production applications, especially chat applications, is managing memory, right? Like manage how do I and that's where usually where you get to the Python side of things, where in order to manage that memory state, you kind of have to sort of build this sort of fuzzy stuff and extract knowledge out of it so it always fits inside of the context window. And it's like reminds me of the old days of which probably still to some degree happening now with iOS development, where you had to do very strict memory management. I just don't wanna do that. I find memory management to be completely boring and something that I want somebody to solve for me. And that's kinda what Zep does, right? So it allows me to use a Llama model and to have, like, the concept of an open AI shared thread object that just works, and I can drop it into any model. So as I change these models, they can all have the shared memory layer. The cool thing about Zep is that they actually incorporate Neo4j underneath the hood, and they have an amazing knowledge graph. So knowledge graphs, I think, are going to be a critical part of advanced retrieval. You may hear things called CAG uh, versus RAG, and I think it's really both, right? Like you need semantic, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But Zep, something I think makes sharing memory between these doesn't mean you have to share memory between these agents, right? The one that may have to ultimately do some of the alignment might need the memory, but it might not. Right? It's really up to you.
Cool. Yeah, basically any logo you see, I'll probably end up making a video on it after this, just for my own, like for my own benefit. I've been on the local LLM side, like I've been writing the Python and stuff like that. But you know, it just sometimes you want to focus your attention on what actually matters, and you know, those are things that you can always come back and implement later. So that's really interesting. I'm
Right.
also really curious what you're going to say about Vercel SDK. As I mean, I did end up using it incidentally, but everyone
Mhm.
keeps talking about it like, "Oh, it's a big deal." I go, "Oh, I didn't even think about it." But yeah, I'm curious what we'll see in that in a moment. But let's focus on if there's it.
And we're
If
going
there's
there.
anything else.
So
Oh,
it
great.
is a big deal, and it's
Mhm.
probably not it's a big deal because it doesn't do so much thing. So when you look at this diagram, the first thing you're probably gonna think of is, "I need an orchestration framework." That
Mhm.
is not Vercel. LangChain has offered systems where, "Hey, if I call this particular agent and it fails because maybe the parsing of the output wasn't right, it'll automatically retry for you maybe 3 times, and you can configure it with, like, a nice little number." You
Mhm.
do not need an orchestration framework here, right? At the end of the day, this is try catch in JavaScript. At the end of the day, these are for loops and basic things. These different things could be in different systems and you're calling them, or they could just be in one application main thread where you're spawning a child process or forking out, right? Like there is no need to have an orchestration framework like Crew AI or AutoGen or maybe even experts.js, right? It's just possibly not needed because at the end of the day, with just a little bit of software engineering, you can coordinate this stuff as you would any sort of control flow and diagram.
The
That said,
oh, serious.
oh, I said that said, I do recommend one of the critical parts about this is that you're using different models. So, like if you're running an evaluation on this whole thing, you're going to maybe want to test certain data sets that run through it and that you come out with the expected output. And maybe one day, Gemini is just too expensive for you, or even DeepSeek is too slow, and you want to change that model out to something else. Well, it's fairly easy, even if you were using pure SDKs for whatever your inference partnership was, is just to swap that out with some different code. But the thing that I've been really, really loving lately is the Vercel AI SDK. I've used LangChain before. Again, with JavaScript, it's never as good as I don't think the JavaScript client was ever as good as the Python. And I think that's actually a positive thing because the Python client had done so much to where people would be applying for me with jobs and they'd be like, I'd say, well, what vector database have you used? And they would say, I've used FAISS. And I was like, well, that's not a vector database. That's a, that's an algorithm by Meta and they thought it was a database because LangChain Python framework offered a simple document, chat with your documents feature with FAIS.
It's always the
And
start too, I think, when you're
yeah,
learning about it on vector databases. What's interesting is um, like I thought you had to learn LangChain to do anything productive. Like you had to do orchestration, but as more as I farther got into it, I realized I don't need. I could just write basic code, and then
basic.
if I really needed it, then I could consider it. But I guess I just entered a time when I never felt productivity in LangChain or Llama Index. I just felt a lot of pain and layers. But does Vercel AI SDK have some level of orchestration in it,
No,
or
no, and that's
okay?
amazing that it does not. It really focuses on these top level interfaces such as generate text, generate object,
Mhm.
stream object. Oh my God, amazing, right? If you have JavaScript or JSON that are streaming, and that streaming needs to be connected up, like let's say you're browsing a product catalog
Mhm.
and you're using bespoke UI, and you're dynamically having AI select UI components as well as the content that goes into those UI components. You could stream individual UI components from the JSON response with stream object. Uh,
The hardest thing I found, and this is through OPA. So like OPA this is more like cloud native side. So if you want to spin up something that is for enterprise production, you can
mhm,
have a bunch of containers. But one thing that they don't do for you is you have to write your own handlers for when data is coming back. And to me, that's the big headache. It's not the orchestration. It's like, how do I handle data coming back and parse it? And if it's all these different formats. And when I'm looking at this, I don't know, but I'm gonna go look into it later. But I wonder if the hidden value here is that they're just handling these things in such an easy way and taking that specific pain away for me that I normally have. If that makes sense.
yeah, and I think one of the thing that I really like about the Vercel AI SDK is that the providers are all based on that more basic chat completions API that I talked about. So they call those providers, right? You will run into some friction, right? So like let's say if you use the Grok provider with Llama 3.3, that provider within the basically that sort of plugin within the overall SDK, they may not have implemented tool calling or structured outputs that are compliant with some of these things like stream object. Uh, Easy fix though, right? It just takes a pull request or maybe raising the, but it's just something to watch out for because I think if you're used to using OpenAI and even the OpenAI through the Vercel AI SDK, you'll get rock solid tool calling and structured outputs. But when you swap to different models, it's something that you have to be cognizant about, right?
I wonder if it's using the structured outputs underneath. Well, this is one reason why I stick with OpenAI so much is that this one's still in beta, at least I think it is. But the structured output JSON, it
Mhm.
just works, right?
Right. And because
And
they built that in the inference platform itself, it's actually built into the
Mhm.
inference platform.
But this is in Python. This is the problem. We're always stuck in Python. But in Python, there's a library called Instructor, which
Mhm.
actually implements it outside of it, so you can plug like a lot of things into it. One reason I didn't like LangChain was that LangChain had like that was one reason I thought maybe I'll stick with LangChain because it has structured output. But underneath, it was just calling the native APIs, or it had implementations for like outdated models and not new ones.
Yep.
So this is kind of
Or it had a vanilla embedding for the in context learning of a schema. And that works for some models and it doesn't others, right? And
But what I think is again what I like about OpenAI is it just works. But yeah, I the other thing is that I wish I could just use Ruby. I'm not sure if you left the Ruby world, but like I did attempt to make something in Ruby, and then I got the OpenAI implementation, and the Ruby gem was not fully implemented, and so I had to go and implement it myself. But if it
Mhm.
had 100% work, then I could see myself. I did get it to work, but if it did, I wish I could just code in Ruby all day because that's what I like to do. So
Yeah. And this is 100% of 100% JavaScript, right? There's it's not in any other language. It's just JavaScript.
like, JavaScript's good too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So but I mean, like if you're gonna go all in, then it covers both your front end and your back end, right? Or I would suppose maybe TypeScript as well, or
Yes. Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah.
Same thing. So I definitely recommend it. This is a great toolkit. It will help you change out uh, providers, but then it will help you understand a little bit more about those trade-offs, right? So when I talked a little bit about that quiz for hiring folks, and I said where I had to switch from OpenAI, what I'm really looking for is an understanding of the trade-offs of structured outputs, which OpenAI makes really really easy, hard to get wrong. It also makes it slow, right? So
Mhm.
like there's uh, what I'm finding now is that different inference partners are actually really leaning into tool calling now. It's taken about a year for them to catch up. So some of that Python stuff that you're talking about hopefully kind of diminishes, and we get to again, much like shared memory, get to move that concern off to the inference partner, and we can kind of focus on the business. So I thought what I could do, ultimately, we're going to ask you to create a Torque profile. Maybe we'll kind of do that at the end and the beginning, Andrew. But like I think one of the things I wanted to cover with folks is more about like some of the things I'm looking at when I'm hiring for folks. So I created, I've been having fun lately creating two binary options and then drawing like where I think people should go in between them. So I kind of made this like little slider here. And, you know, one of the things I see a lot where people talk about on their resume is using local models or local deployments, or when I pose certain questions, would you optimize certain things? And they would say, oh, I'd start off with a local model. And I will tell you, I am a huge fan of LM Studio. Love it to death, right? Got to play with R1 locally. Like, it makes me wanna buy more Mac Minis and stitch them together and run my own inference platform. I have no idea why.
So Ken, the reason so when I don't know if you saw, I recorded a course for DeepSeek. It did really well for some
Uh-huh.
reason, you know, because it's but
It's DeepSeek.
my conclusion was I was like, oh yeah, DeepSeek's. I was like, it's okay, but I ended up using Elm Studio because you had used it, and I was like, oh, this is really good. The only thing I had the issue with DeepSeek R1 was that it exhausted the resources of both my computers, and then my next thought was like, how do I use EXO? Is it called EXO? How do I use EXO to distribute it? So my next goal, maybe I don't have 5 Mac Minis, but I have 4 ragtag computers that could do it. And so I'll tell you how that goes. But that's literally on my roadmap to do.
Yeah.
Hopefully before the end of boot camp.
It looks like you have a lot of wood too, so you'll be able to power all this for sure.
Yeah.
Steam or something. But,
Mhm.
you know, every time I try LM Studio and I'm thinking, "Oh, maybe I'll use LM Studio for a local model and play off with it with," I just kind of it doesn't work, right? Like it seems like this nice idea, but
Oh,
like recently had to do a
so when you say it doesn't
classification.
work, does it hang your machine?
Well, it's just too slow. Like so, for instance, I was doing uh, it seems like I'm just always optimizing the wrong thing when I go back to LM Studio. Like I use it, I have fun with it, and certainly if you don't have the finances or the money to pay for these other platforms or you're pushing past their free tier, then
Mm.
definitely use that, right? But you're going to end up with a situation where, maybe the quantized version that you're using doesn't really kind of perform like it's going to do when you move it to production, right? So like there's some of that like uh that Docker story. Well, if it works on your laptop, I'll just ship it to the cloud sort of thing.
Well, I guess my thoughts like with so when I used LM Studio, I was just trying to think of it as an AI powered assistant. So I know you can download models as well. Does it have like an API so you can interact? Because you can
Yeah.
download models. I
And
see.
it's lazy too, so, like, you could have it just run in the background and it'll automatically offload your model, but then when you hit it again, it will reload it for you, so it can
Oh,
automatically, swap your cartridges in and out basically as well, which is pretty cool, and then I can have one running on my gaming PC behind me, or, so it's neat. I like it, but at the end of the day, I wrote a classification system, 2 weekends ago. I tried to start off on LM Studio, but then at the end of the day, I was like, "I'm just gonna use Bedrock with the Haiku model." It's just much faster, and then I can actually, when I needed to run 25 examples just to see if the prompting was working, so I went back this way, and then my feedback loop was much faster, right? And even when I ran 10,000 examples through Bedrock with Haiku, it only cost me $2, right? So what was I optimizing for, right? Like, I couldn't get it would have taken me 2 days to get that fast feedback over here with LM Studio, and it wouldn't even be the model that was eventually in production.
I think for me, like the challenge with LM Studio is that when you open a model, there's all these knobs and dials to optimize it,
Mhm.
and I don't know
Always
if
temperature 0. Temperature 0 every time.
temperature 0 every time. But it was just all the options there, like, to because again, my issue was it was hanging, but that was specifically for DeepSeek. But, I've had better experience with, Direct Olama. For some reason, it just works.
Mhm.
But, yeah, I don't know. The problem is I do also just it's so easy to dump my OpenAI key and just go with it, and you load up $20 and it feels like it lasts forever. I'm still paying
Yeah.
my same $20 that I spent months and months and months ago. So it's kind of hard, but I don't know. I'm playing both sides, is what I'm saying. So
Yes, yeah.
mhm.
So the other side is, when you get down to using AI, where are you going to use it, right? So as let's say you have the engineering background, um, you're using the AI Vercel SDK. Oftentimes, I'll see resumes and experience out there that list like, well, I worked on a chatbot, right? So like a lot of times you see people where, hey, I spun up LangChain, I threw some documents in it, and now I'm actually a RAG person, right? Or I've gone through and I've done something with a chatbot, and now I have chatbot experience. And chatbot experience is what I call sort of lazy thinking, right? Because the chatbot, that's commoditized, right? You can load up any model, you can chat with it, whether you do it with LM Studio or hundreds of other Python or JavaScript frameworks that allow you to spin up a chatbot incredibly easy. Vercel vSphere would do the same. What's really interesting for the skills is not necessarily the chatbot, it's the stuff that happens underneath the chatbot, right? So the chatbot only works amazingly well because you build in retrieval, because you have tool calling and you can integrate into the knowledge system. So if you're talking about your resume, if you're listing your skills out and you're thinking about like talking about retrieval or chatbots, maybe, mention chatbot, but emphasize more the things that you did with the chatbot because that's actually the hard stuff, right? Like the knowledge retrieval systems, how you dealt with tool calling, what were the systems that you talked to? What did you do with your tool calling, right? Did you generate SQL dynamically? Did you talk to other API and distributed systems? Did you create the knowledge systems underneath that chatbot so that it was a good chatbot? Those are all the things that are way more interesting. But also, where I spent a lot of time on the operational side, where you're taking a back end business process and you're sort of canonizing it into some sort of whether it be a compound AI, but you're just basically just running that through. Classification is a great example. That has a lot of value in marketing, where you could look at things from like what I did at Custom Ink, like every design. Is this a education segment? Is this another business segment? Does it have a use case like uniforming, uh, et cetera, et cetera? Classification vastly, vastly still very much needed in a lot of background business processes. And then you kind of get into the business process automation, which is basically how do you take things that humans were doing and then automate them? And I think AI has way more potential over here for people hiring. I think chatbots are kind of like the thing that people say, but what they really mean, it's this stuff under here. But I definitely think lean more towards the operational, but I'd kind of put it right about there in the middle. You got to know about both of these, and don't just say chatbot.
Yeah, it makes sense. I would say, and maybe I'm just going to wait because I want to see when data shows up. But
There we go. Let's talk about retrieval.
okay,
Is that it?
yep, that's it. That's exactly what I was looking for. Was this part? Yep. Mhm.
Cool.
Yep.
And this is the first time you've seen this. I don't think you like you just knew it was coming.
Well, I mean, I was just saying, I'm just thinking about my pain points of like, if I saw something on the resume, like what is the thing that would tell me that you know what you're doing? Because where I find my decisions are pinned on how do I handle my large amounts of data, like how do I retrieve it and how do I work with it, right? So
Mhm.
I did a hackathon where it was for it was a Riot Games hackathon for whatever their game was, and they had gigabytes of JSON data. And I'm like, what do I do with this? Do I put it in a knowledge base or do I put it in a relational database? And how do I retrieve it? And how do I make it relevant? And I was talking to a lot of when I was doing my Gen AI, going around Canada, showing people how to use Gen AI. I had a lot of companies being like, oh, we have all these medical documents and we don't know like where do they go in a vector database, whatever, and what we do. And so like it really made me think, okay, a lot of this can really hinge on how you need to work with your data.
Mhm.
And like get to your data and yeah, sorry, but
No, you're so right. So
mhm,
when a lot of times you'll see resumes where they're like, okay, I know RAG, right? And then like that face example that I talked about, where I was like, okay, well, tell me what you know about RAG. And I will tell you that almost all of the people that I talk to stayed in the semantic column, and that is not going to get you the job. It is not going to get you the job because if you sit here and say, okay, well, I spent a lot of time on documents and chunking and dumping stuff into a knowledge base, you're dealing with a highly commoditized system that doesn't bring a lot of a value, right? Like, so it's easy to dump. You go to Amazon Bedrock, you can create a knowledge base, you can dump documents in. You can go to
mhm.
ChatGPT, you can go to Claude Projects and dump a whole bunch of things in and get various forms of knowledge retrieval around like semantic documents. But what really makes these things work in real production environments are when they're paired up next to some other database, right? So TurboPuffer, an example of like kind of one type of semantic database. Most of them, even the ones here that like your regular faceted or columnar, not necessarily columnar, but your relational databases. So Postgres, OpenSearch, great one, right? Like OpenSearch, you can install that in a Docker container. So look for technologies like Neo4j. JS actually isn't in a Docker container. You can just use that as a service. But so many of these databases, so focus on these two. Look for the overlaps between these two, right? So look for the overlap where the semantic database and the faceted or classified search is actually the same thing. And then that way, when you get to query and say, "Hey, think product catalog. I need to find uh, apparel that's good to wear on the beach, but it has to be a hoodie, right? So the hoodie is the facet, right? So you don't search semantically across all the documents. It's like a where query on side of a clause on top of a SQL query. You're basically doing pre-filtering, and then you're running your semantic search. And now we're finding out that that actually needs to involve knowledge graphs as well. And then I think a lot of people forget, retrieval basically can just be good old fashioned APIs, right? Just, and I think there's huge value over there, right? So in my mind, AI engineers are application integrators, right? You're not dealing with just the semantic databases. You know how to talk to all the systems of a particular business or even other vendors that you may need to talk to get data. Again, those would be things like we talked about over here in the compound AI. That could be these things over here, searching, right? It could be other types of domains inside your business, right? Like maybe it's the merchandising system that you need to talk to, or some sort of order system or whatnot. These APIs are just as useful to get data and put them in context learning for retrieval.
The thing that this is I think that I kind of fell into this trap initially, and I think a lot of people do, is that when you first learn about RAG and vector databases, everybody wants to shove everything in a vector database, and they just kind of forget of all these other sources that exist and why they exist, right?
Yep.
And like even when I was doing that hackathon in particular, everybody's solution was use a vector database, and everything was just focused on almost like, why
No.
wouldn't you just use a relational database? Like if you have a bunch of relational data, put it in a relational database, or if it's highly relational, then put it in a graph database if it makes sense.
Right, and no vector database exists without KNN pre-filtering, right? Like, the pre-filtering is the most important part. As soon as you get to pre-filtering, because if you have 10 million things in your database and your answer is like, "I gotta do a product recommendation," you can't bring back all 10 million of those things and ask AI about them. You only have to you have to get to a certain part of that data, and to get to that certain part, you have to pre-filter, and that's where the regular database comes in. So, I ask that question all the time, Andrew. I would go, "Okay, use a semantic search database. Tell me about one column that you used with that," right? I didn't wanna give the candidates, the KN like a pre-filter keyword to, but nobody could answer that question, or very few could.
Well, and so I think this is the again, it's people just need to get a bit deeper, deeper or
Mhm.
get that visualization. But I think again, it's just the entry point that people are coming in, right?
Yeah.
And that's I think that's the problem.
Go to the right, go to the
Yeah.
right. Think about that, sort of totality, right? So start here with the documents, get that experience, but then quickly move over here to the
But what
right-hand
I'm
side.
saying is I've never seen this visualization ever, right? So I'm just saying like did you find this visualization or is this something that came out of your head?
Out of my head.
Okay, so like I'm saying like I came to a very like I'm sure I would just use different words, but I would have came to the same conclusion. But when I started out, there's nobody putting this in front of my face, right?
Oh
And
my god.
so you only looked at the first thing, which was vector databases, right?
Yep.
And there was no other stuff there. Sorry. Yep.
Well, I'm an odd person. Whenever as soon as I got into AI back in, like March of 2023, I had all this previous experience. I had built enterprise search system. I had built faceted catalogs. Knowledge graphs weren't a big thing for me, but you know, APIs were. So when I hit the ground running with AI and retrieval, I brought all of that with me. Uh, so that's what I'm trying to tell newcomers.
Mhm.
If you don't have that experience, this is what I'm telling you, right? Like, go learn that semantic. Don't forget that other stuff. You will set yourself apart from so many other people by just bringing good database experience.
Well, and I had the experience with the other ones, but like I was blindsided by vector databases, and I didn't think of bringing my old skills forward, right? And then when I just thought about it a bit deeper, I'm like, wait, why do we have to do it this way? And it's not. It's just nobody was talking about anything else but vector databases. The only the first way of doing it, which was
Right.
interesting. Hmm.
So this all kind of retrieval kind of all gets into this concept about prompt engineering in a weird way. So you can go to Claude, maybe Anthropic's website, and look at, like, parts of a prompt and how to do things. But a lot of times you'll end up where, you talk about maybe tasks and context and roles. Knowledge, there's this thing called like few shot prompting where you put in example of, previous knowledge. Like, let's say you're asking a classification system to make a decision. Uh, you would bring in maybe knowledge and examples of what that decision needs to be, right? So this would be instructions on how to perform the task. This is like the goal and things like that. But I don't think a lot of people think about within prompting. If you had things like LangChain, you will experience things. Well, you need a prompt template. Prompt templates are basically retrieval opportunities all over the place, right? So if you think you have a classification system and maybe provide 5 or 6 examples of how that classification might work, if you really want that that system to do really well, maybe come up with a 100 examples, and then maybe build a separate retrieval system to grab the right example dynamically for the problem at hand that you're running through it. So always look at knowledge and examples in few shot prompting as more retrieval opportunities, to pull again from these sort of static or dynamic systems, and databases and API. Um, but when you do hit the ground running, and you're applying for apply AI engineer job, and like myself, you're asking questions about what are the prompt engineering techniques you use, you'll see questions like people saying, okay, I use chain of thought, or meta prompting, where I'm using a larger model like O3 or or R1 from DeepSeek to give me sort of really deep research, and then using that deep research to generate a meta prompt for another smaller model, to use over and over again. Um, you know,
And you
things
know
like
what? I'll be honest with you. I've never done meta prompting. Like all the other ones I've done, but that's the first time I've heard of. I mean, I can logically understand that, but I had not heard the term meta prompting till now.
what's I've used that too with like thinking, like in a lot of my chain of thought systems, and this is what I'm talking about down here, contextualities. Sorry, so don't just tell the interviewee like me, hey, I've done chain of thought. Tell me how you've used chain of thought. So, for example, uh, and a lot of times where I've used chain of thought, it would be Claude where I said, "Okay, I need you to start thinking and then give me the answer, and the answer needs to be in a certain format." And then maybe you start off with a thinking tag so that you're sort of putting words in Claude's mouth, to get the model to go with so it starts generating the tokens off of that. But you have to. there's problems there, right? Like, so, like, how do you write the parser so that you're getting the answer only? Um, how do you deal with hallucination? So, right, like one of the way I've done with hallucinations is, let's say if the answer came back and it wasn't an exact string match, I might either do another smaller language model, or I just might append another message to go, well, this is what you told me. Were you sure you were supposed to pick from these 5 options, right? And it can kind of course correct after that. And then you can kind of run a little for loop to do that 3 times if need be, where you're basically saving tokens and pushing it back up again. Um, so these are all words that you can use, like the React, but contextualize them. Talk about like how you use them. Get experience doing that as well, right? So chain of thought is just, it's very common, but when you get down to using it, there are very critical decisions you have to make in how you use it, depending upon the system you build.
Something that works really well for me is when I'm building it to define states and to tell it to move through states. That might be considered tree of thought, but not necessarily, because tree of thought limits things. But
Mhm.
I just found that by describing specific states, that I can use a single model more efficiently and not have to break into smaller models right away
Yep.
for specialized tasks. But in the boot camp, what we tell folks is like that's what you're supposed to be documenting, is like what, and like this stuff, like not just that you used it, but how did you use it? And the way we approach it, because I used to write a lot of shred in Canada, that is scientific research and whatever. And so
Yeah.
companies that wanted to get money back for their startups, you would go to the government and say, well, I'm doing scientific research in technology, right? And so you had to have technical uncertainty. You had to define what it is beforehand, define what your hypothesis was. You had to document your approach to it, and then what was the outcome or conclusion. And so, to me, that's the number one thing that I want boot campers to do, because then, like we're going to see the differences of like, well, okay, you chose ancient Greek as your language, and you can't use OpenAI to do that. So how did you overcome it? So tell me how you did it, and in a technical way, like exactly what that is. And don't define what chain of thought is. I don't care. I want to know how have you solved through your issue, right? And so
Yeah.
that's kind of like the big emphasis of the boot camp. Mhm.
When I talk a little bit later on about like how I've been fielding applications with folks, like I'll talk about like how I'm a huge fan of personal AI, and
Mhm.
you should use AI for your personal stuff, but it's also really easy to tell when you use personal AI to submit for job applications, because I bet you one thing, my AI is better than your AI, and I'll be able to come up and figure out like if you're answering the question. I even put in certain I put in certain honeypots, Andrew, in like my AI surveys
Oh, yeah?
that are meant to sort of suss out if your resume responses are bringing in keywords from the job opportunity in the resume, right? So like, it basically allows me to, like, I know you're using AI in certain places, and I think that's fine. I highly encourage it. But like when I give you questions about sort of like an inversion where I'm asking you to ask me what I should have asked you, right? It's really easy for me to detect AI instances like that, because I'm asking you to do the thing you just said, right? Don't tell me what chain of thought is and academically why it's important. I want to know exactly how you used it.
Mhm.
So we'll come back to down to like a nice little summary of what I think an AI engineer is. I'm going to jump around a little bit, because I think one of the big things that if you're an AI engineer, you're a cloud native developer. And I'm going to kind of punt over here to the left a little bit and talk about uh, cloud native. So I built, we talked a little bit about these kind of concepts before of, I think it was up
Oh, sorry.
here.
So, Ken, before you jump on there, how do
uh,
you define cloud native?
Um, basically using primitives, right? So anything like SQS, um, uh, you don't have to necessarily be cloud native, but you would have to use the tools that are available to you. That could be another SaaS service, right? So like Zep would be, it would kind of fall to my definition of cloud, right? Like you're using a cloud service as a key critical part. Um, but I think, you know, I've done a lot of work where AI has been operationalized, and part of that operationalized aspect of it is being able to use the cloud really well, right? So how do
So
you
the
set up?
mm,
Go ahead.
the
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. The reason I bring that specific term up is
Yeah.
some folks will know this and some folks won't. But cloud native, it means different things depending on where you come from. So if you come from the Kubernetes side of it, the
Mhm.
CNCF side of it, they define cloud native as basically using Kubernetes and a collection of other services in that ecosystem. Basically, mean like spin up your own cloud, right? And
Right.
then the cloud native that I first knew, which was like if you use cloud services, then you are cloud native, right? If you say
Right.
like I use SQL and a bunch of stuff that like I like infrastructure as a
SQS.
service,
Yeah. Or yeah,
infrastructure service,
or yeah, cloud formation, SQS, Lambda, right? These are all
yeah.
you
Uh,
know,
but we would categorize that in the IaaS, infrastructure as a service, right? Because they're
mhm.
offering up your storage, your compute, your databases. These are your primitives, and just understand that there's the duality of the term. And so I think in this case, we're talking about not the CNCF Kubernetes Cloud Native thing, which is actually kind of included in some way, but we're talking about cloud managed clouds where you have services that you can get operational very quickly.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
if you have experience, so the idea here is that I'll jump around a little bit, but I think there's a sweet spot in being an AI engineer where you can use cloud basically cloud native technologies, as well as having a strong engineering background. You're a superstar if you understand databases. Um, if you're dealing with advanced retrieval systems, this pattern right here is going to be a gold mine for you because at the end of the day, it's like the good old days with search, right? So, like your Algolia search is not your full transactional database; it's an index of it at some point, right? And when you're dealing with knowledge systems, whether that's knowledge graphs, semantic retrieval, and/or cross-reference with just good old regular databases to do pre-filtering, you're going to need to normalize the aspect of re-indexing, right? So as new models come out, as you need to change and maybe embedding models or even the dimensionality of those embeddings, it's going to be common for you to want to, as you change your prompts, to also change the data structures, the indexes behind that. So
For those that are wondering, Agolia is a serverless service that you can use to get like it's a managed service to add search into your platform. If you've ever used Deb.to, there at least
mhm.
right now, their search is powered by Agolia.
Yep.
If anyone doesn't know that term, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, so the idea here is basically simple. When you're building these systems, get used to connecting them with queues, right? So I talked a lot about how you don't need code necessarily like LangChain or Crew AI to build orchestration systems. Uh, they are certainly not going to give you the capability, even if you did need some sort of orchestration to build out pipelines, right? So we're not when I talk about data pipelines, I'm not talking about machine learning data pipelines. I'm talking about good old fashioned stuff where you just need a webhook that something happens. So if you are building an AI system around your order system within your company, you're going to want to know when an order is created or updated, or maybe even the merchandising system, right? When a product is added to the merchandising system or when it's updated, so that you can have a representation of that within your stuff, right? Like you don't want the entire representation of the object. You only may want, a semantic embedding around the product description, and then maybe some KNN pre-filtering for the price or the per unit price. So when somebody says in chat, it has to be less than $15 per unit, right? You can KNN pre-filter off of that in your database before you run your semantic search. Uh, this type of architecture where you could basically stand up either SQS queues or you can listen to Event Bridge events and then you can re-index data. You want to normalize and make that easy because change is going to be happening in these systems, and anybody that can take basic cloud things like SQS queues, Event Bridge, or hook into other systems through
Mhm.
APIs and just get the right data and build it into their indexes, normalize that change as AI keeps changing, you're going to do really, really
So,
well.
so Ken, that EDA stands for event-driven architectures.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how is this? And maybe it is. How is this not a data pipeline, or is
Mm,
or is it?
Well, it depends. I've never really looked at data pipelines as being OLTP, right? Because to me, this is hooked up to online transactional processing,
I see.
right?
Okay.
I always looked at data pipelines and data activation, where you use things like reverse ETL and Databricks and other things like that as part of like uh, typically data pipelines take all the online transactional databases and pull them into a data warehouse, and then from that data warehouse they create truth and fact tables out of that, and then they take the truth and fact tables and then they do the activation with the data and pipe it back out to the business in certain ways like customer data platforms and things like that. That is, and then traditionally, again, the mismatch at the beginning of the talk, that's where people think they need to make AI. And true, you probably need that type of stuff when you're making AI, not when you're using it, right? This is online transactional processing pattern.
Okay. And yeah, to me, this is just propagating your data to index it so you always have you're always up to date and leveraging your existing systems.
Which you'd have
Um,
to do with Angolia anyway.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so I just bring that out because some folks might think they have to go to the deep end, right? They're going, oh, now I have to build a data pipeline, and like, what does that mean when you say data pipeline?
Mhm.
Because that can be a much more involved process. Sorry.
Yep, absolutely. So again, so sum it up, what is an AI engineer, right? Like it's somebody that is kind of sitting between this sweet spot here, right? You're just a regular engineer that understands control flows and systems, right? So you've got all the skills of a regular engineer, and that's even being commoditized more now, right? With these with assistants, Cursor, Copilot, et cetera, right? You can describe. I've built entire pipelines where I'm not even really coding anymore. I'm just describing the process, and the engineering is not really what I'm doing. What I'm really doing is, whoops, why is it not clicking through? Oh, there it goes. I'm really just doing something that's right. Like, so what's normal to me is async and queues, right? If you don't have that experience, build that stuff up. So for example, um, when I built the classification system the other day in JavaScript, I use async and await a lot. And if I am hitting an inference server like Amazon Bedrock with the Haiku model, I know that there are certain quotas where I can't go over a certain amount of requests or tokens per minute, right? So then I would use something like the PQ library uh, with uh, with JavaScript, and that would allow me to throw 5 or 6 promises into a queue, and then that will sort of throttle my overall token usage. But first and foremost, right, AI engineers are distributed systems engineers. You're basically application integrating your regular engineering where you ran unit tests, which hopefully everybody does. I do not say you have to be test driven development, but with AI, you need to know how to test and evaluate that your platforms are running. And again, that's
So
super easy. You don't.
Ken, how do you feel about AI writing your tests?
I don't write tests. I just write. Well, I mean, I think AI writing your tests means unit tests, right? Like write me
Yeah.
some functional tests for this, and I think
Well,
you.
so if we specifically talk about, sorry for cutting you off. If we specifically
Mhm,
talk about unit tests, there's a company called Codo, used to be
mhm.
called Codium,
Yeah,
QODO, and
yeah.
their product, all it does is write out unit tests. That's all it does. So, but
Are they tautological? Do they just end up being like, 1 plus 1 equals 2 in a different way?
I mean, like, do you mean like, are the tests good?
Right, like, are the tests actually exercising the system in a way?
I don't know. I actually have a use case for it.
Mhm,
But I was anyway. I'll tell you more about it after the call. But the thing is that I have more to investigate with Kodo. But
cool.
what I did is I used because we built the Lang portal, which is a traditional application, and I
Mhm.
had wrote the entire technical doc, like because I used to build apps after apps after apps. So I literally just wrote up everything I wanted, and I said go to town. Which I found out that's a bad approach to using AI coding systems. You really should build feature brick by brick like you used to do it, but with the AI. But maybe we'll get your opinion about that about Cursor later on. But after that, I told it to go write test code, and I said go back to the source of truth to my technical specifications, which literally detailed exactly what my JSON responses should be, exactly what should come back, and it found a lot of problems with the code that was generated out. But eventually, it had all tests passing. But the question is, were my tests any good? So at the end of the
Right.
day, it's like someone still has to check it, right? To make sure it's some stage of it anyway. And so I was kind of making a joke like, do you just let it write all the unit tests and then if the LLM says the tests are good from the generated code, then therefore everything's okay?
I'm
Like
honestly
human
not
removed?
writing tests anymore. I'm
Mhm.
writing evals, right? So I'm writing it looks like a unit test, but basically, if you're used to writing unit tests with AI, you have to learn how to make your tests that fail or pass 80% of the time, pass 100% of the time.
Sorry. So when I was talking about unit testing, I just meant like traditional code, right? And so when we're talking about like AI in particular, we don't write unit tests for AI like an agent, or sorry, no, like the output of an LM. We do data evals. Or are you suggesting that data evals can be used in traditional development?
Yes. So I have written projects where I've written like a unit test where this particular model, given this particular input, as always part of a unit test that run, like a npm run test or whatever, is going
Hmm.
to come out with the right classification. But it's
Okay.
going to fail at some point, right? So like it's not a unit test to me in the sense where I would hook it up to a CI/CD pipeline. I'd say if this fails, you can't ship it. So I don't really call it unit tests anymore. I just call them evals, and uh, I've been getting better at writing evals.
Okay. So we're talking about like evaluation, the prediction of whatever the model we're using, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So playing with tools like Braintrust, Langsmith offers them again. but I'm liking companies where it's sort of model agnostic. Braintrust has a really good integration with the Vercel AI SDK because it implements an OTel observer, which I think is really cool. Um, but all this stuff aside, right? Hey, you're an engineer, you're cloud native, you're perhaps goaded, and you got the database experience. What I think is more important, and that's is being on this human interface side. So one of the things that I'm finding out, I've always felt like I've been a good software engineer, not because I've been incredibly technical, but because I've always indexed on creating a solution to either a human problem or some amount of joy in a user interface that I need to bring to somebody during a product experience, or basically just solving a business problem, right? Generating revenue, saving money, etc. Um, that I think is going to be the most valuable skill for an AI engineer is being able to connect human centric problem solving, thinking creatively, right? So as I'm building systems within Torque, where I'm thinking about, what are the things that are recruiters really doing with their time? That's not a coding exercise. I have to really get in somebody's head. And then once I find that out, I need to find ways to build systems that mimic what the brain is doing. And I will tell you something. If you dig into this human interface and you go to a large model like O3 Mini, which is can be used right now in Chat GPT, and you ask it questions about what you're trying to solve, you will end up with probably some 1970s, 1980s, or 1990s human interface research that is so critical to what you can apply in AI. So, like Andrew, I forget at what point we talked about like research, but I think things are going to kind of come back in cyclical. We're going to look at human interface guidelines that were done many, many years ago that actually help us guide us in what we're doing. And we all we need from an AI engineer perspective is a little bit of empathy and behavioral science, which I'm not a behavioral science person, right? But I have these large language models that I can help me ask questions for, and they'll guide me that way. And I think there's going to be a lot of value for engineers that have that technical, the control flows, the systems, the distributed systems, and they can sit right here in the middle. But human interface, I think, is going to be. I think every AI engineer is going to be a human interface engineer.
When I went to college, behavioral science was part of what we had to learn, right? So we were learning all. I did multimedia, it's like types of technology, animation, 3D, everything, which makes sense. I'm a content creator now, but behavioral science was a large aspect of it because you have to figure out why you're doing it, like what's the purpose. One thing that I think is interesting, if I was trying to create an example for folks, is like DevTO. When
Mhm.
DevTO first started out, it was a new developer social platform, and it did well. And you know why it did well? Was not just because they built a social platform, which many people have done over the times. People join them and then just dissipate. But they knew that when people joined, that they needed to make sure they felt included into the community while they're
Mm.
building it. And so they had a whole system to welcome people to interact with them on their day one or day 100 piece of content or days that they were there. And they built systems around it. Whereas like you see something, remember when there's a big scramble about like, what platform we should go because something has changed in the world. And so
Yeah,
people go to Blue Sky or somewhere else or Meta Threads, whatever it's called.
yeah.
People show up and there's no systems in place for those humans. And so they're just hoping that, by sheer volume that it's going to take win, but it doesn't because they didn't really think of the human component of it, right? They didn't design for that growth for those people, for the first 100 days or whatever. And that's what's missing. And that's why I say that there's things that are out there that already exist, but you can build them again and they will be successful if you understand that component, not the tech component, but where humans meet the tech or where you can
Mhm.
accelerate the human side of that experience. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, 100% agree. So after all this, this is kind of what I think a really good AI engineer is. These are the skills that you think I need. I hope I've given folks like just a glimpse into, the hiring that I've done. Again, that's very much from the skills that I'm looking for. But I do believe that it's transformative, right? Like that we're going to see a lot more need for people. Uh, the engineering stuff I think will kind of just be given to us automatically as AI helps us out more with that stuff, and I think it will actually end up being more on the human side. I did want to leave folks with a way to perhaps get a job. And this is no guarantee here, but I do work for a company that helps folks land with AI jobs. So what I want to encourage everybody to do and is to basically go to torque.dev, create a profile. Andrew, I think you and I had talked about ways that grading for this course can work into here. I'll give you a little bit of brief explanation. So once you go to torque.dev, you can basically use your resume any CV you might have, and it'll help you set up your profile real quickly. Check these roles and skills or these that interest you. There's AI engineer, full stack. You might be more of a front end developer, AI engineer, or back end developer, AI engineer. Whatever you feel is best for you. Create that profile. You end up with a great profile, and then as course grading works, we're going to have some Gen AI essentials, or I believe the Gen AI bootcamp badges to show that you've completed it, and then that will help you find a job better on Torque. We're going to be able to know about you, that you came in from this community. We're going to be able to promote you a little bit better, and we're going to be able to engage with you with our uh, community team as well because of that.
And boot campers, remember everything we're seeing here. I'm working to align it. So even the services, there's some services I didn't even know that Ken Collins showed me, and so I might retroactively go back and update the Gen AI Essentials or rework those things. So the goal is to try to align developers the best they can with the outcome, and everybody wants everyone to succeed. We just need to figure out where that alignment is. But yeah, I think maybe what I might do after this is I might go show people, and maybe Ken, privately, you can tell me whether I did a good job or not. But I might try to go and show how I think I would like to see people showcase their skills, right? And maybe people can leverage that to think about how to best do that, right, and align themselves for this emerging market.
Yep, and we've got capabilities in our platform, whether through assessments and other things where we can take those skills not just through the badging and the digital credentials, but in all sorts of creative ways. So that would be fun, Andrew.
Cool, cool. But yeah, I appreciate you coming out here and giving us all this information. Definitely was eye opener for me in terms of the way things are structured. Because when you're learning this stuff, I think that we end up at the same stuff, but we end up creating our own internal vocabulary and language to describe these things. It's interesting. The whole boot camp's based around language, right? And
Mhm.
so it's nice when we all start sharing common terminology and language and describing these things, because then we basically form a community. And so, yeah, that's my tie-in, I would say, to all this kind of stuff. But are there any parting words for our boot campers before we go?
Um, I cannot emphasize enough that I think this is the right moment for people that maybe have either been in engineering before or adjacent engineering careers or even not in engineering at all. Some of the best engineers that I've met have liberal arts degrees. So there's an opportunity now where you feel that the things that you do creatively that Gen AI unlocks, to just lean into that. I do think there's a lot of companies that still haven't figured out how to apply it yet. And I think it's really easy for folks to go, well, we're being given something and sold something that, people don't want, or the promise is not really going to meet the expectations. And I've come from a perspective where everything that I've done for AI generates value and real meaning, and I don't buy it, right? I think there's so much opportunity still left out there. And just in my recent hiring experience, I would love to find more people here in this community and from this program that are the type of qualifications that I'm looking for. I think it's desperately needed, and I think there's just opportunity out there. So I encourage folks to learn, be curious, engage with the community, yours and ours, and just look to the future.
Great. Well, again, appreciate your time here. And boot campers, I will see you in class soon. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks.